The moment I stepped onto that stage and said her name into the microphone, the entire gala room went dead silent. Hundreds of eyes locked onto me. Champagne glasses paused midair, conversations cut off mid-sentence. Even the soft background music seemed to fade into nothing. And at the center of it all, she was sitting there, smiling, wearing that same fragile expression she always used when people looked at her with sympathy. She had no idea what was coming, no idea that in less than a minute, the truth she built her entire identity around was about to collapse in front of everyone she had ever deceived. I tightened my grip on the microphone because what I was about to do wasn't small. It wasn't personal in the way people usually think of revenge. It was public and irreversibly. My name is Daniel, and up until a few months ago, I genuinely believed I was helping someone fight for their life. Looking back now, that's the part that bothers me the most. Not that I was fooled, but that I believed so deeply that I never questioned what didn't feel right. I met her through mutual friends. Her name was Lauren. She had this calm presence about her, soft-spoken, polite, the kind of person who listened more than she spoke. At first, she didn't stand out much, just another face in the background of group dinners and casual meetups. Then everything changed one evening when she didn't show up to an event. People started asking questions, messages went around, and that's when the news came out. Lauren had been diagnosed with cancer. It wasn't framed dramatically at first, just a simple update shared through a mutual friend. But within hours, the tone changed. Photos appeared, posts followed, messages of support flooded in. And suddenly, she wasn't just Lauren anymore. She was someone fighting, someone strong, someone in need of help. The next time I saw her, she looked different, not physically, but in how she carried herself. Tired eyes, slightly slower movements, a quiet vulnerability that made people naturally lower their voices around her. She didn't talk about the diagnosis unless asked, but when she did, she kept it brief, controlled, almost rehearsed. "It's been tough," she'd say, giving a small smile, "but I'm managing." People around her responded exactly how you'd expect. Support, encouragement, offers to help, and then came the fundraiser posts, hospital visits, medical updates, photos of her lying in a hospital bed, wearing a cap, holding onto a blanket, looking fragile but composed. It all seemed real, too real to question. At some point, I started getting more involved, not in a dramatic way, just gradually, helping organize small support efforts, donating when I could, checking in occasionally. She appreciated it, at least that's how it seemed. She'd reply to messages with gratitude. Sometimes she'd say things like, "You've been really kind to me during this," and I believed her, because why wouldn't I? But over time, small inconsistencies started appearing. Nothing obvious at first, just details that didn't quite align. One day, she'd mention a treatment session scheduled for early morning. The next day, she'd post casually about being out with family during that same time frame. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Schedules change, plans shift. Medical routines can be unpredictable, but the pattern kept repeating, and the more I noticed, the harder it became to ignore. There was one moment that stuck with me. We were at a small gathering organized to support her. People were talking to her one-on-one, asking how she was feeling, how treatments were going. When it was my turn, I asked her something simple. "How's the treatment been lately?" She smiled, but paused for just a second too long. "It's manageable," she said. "Some days are better than others." Normal answer, but her tone didn't match the emotion people usually carry when talking about something that serious. There was distance in it, like she was describing someone else's experience. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not because I doubted her immediately, but because something in my mind refused to settle. So I started paying closer attention, not openly, not in a way that would raise suspicion, just observing patterns, timing, behavior. What I noticed was subtle. She was always present at events where people were watching, but less visible when things were quieter. Her posts were always carefully timed. Updates came after interactions, not before. And the tone of her communication never wavered. No fluctuation, no raw emotional breakdowns, no unpredictability, just consistency. Too much consistency. I remember bringing it up casually to one of our mutual friends, not accusing, just asking, "Have you noticed anything off about the timing of her updates?" They shrugged it off immediately. "You're overthinking it," they said. "She's going through something serious. People deal with things differently." And maybe they were right. Maybe I was overthinking, but the doubt had already taken root. And once it's there, it doesn't just disappear. A few days later, I found myself looking through her older posts again, trying to piece together timelines, Comparing dates. Matching her updates with public appearances, that's when something stood out. Certain posts referenced treatments or hospital visits that didn't align with available scheduling patterns at the facilities she mentioned. It wasn't definitive, but it was enough to make me pause. At that point, I had two options: ignore it or dig deeper. And I'll be honest, part of me wanted to ignore it, because questioning something like this isn't easy. If you're wrong, you look insensitive. If you're right, the situation becomes much heavier than you expected. But I couldn't let it go. Not anymore. So I started looking into it more seriously. Not publicly, privately, carefully. I reached out to someone who worked in a related medical environment under the pretense of general questions. I didn't mention her name at first. I just asked about standard procedures, common timelines, and typical patient experiences. The answers I received didn't directly confirm anything, but they helped me understand what should be happening. And that gave me a baseline. Then I revisited her behavior again, this time comparing it against that baseline. That's when the gaps became more visible. Things that should have been consistent weren't. Things that should have varied didn't. It didn't prove anything outright, but it raised a question that I couldn't ignore anymore. Was this real? Or was it constructed? I still didn't want to believe it, because if it was true, it meant something much worse than just a misunderstanding. It meant people had been emotionally invested, financially involved, and deeply supportive, based on something that might not be real. And I had been part of that. One evening, after another small support update was posted, I sat alone scrolling through the comments. Dozens of people offering encouragement, some sharing their own personal stories, others mentioning donations they had made. The trust in those messages felt genuine, and that's what made the doubt feel heavier. Because if there was deception involved, it wasn't just one person being affected. It was a whole network of people who believed they were helping someone in need. That night, I made a decision. Not to accuse, not to expose, not yet, but to confirm. Because before doing anything that could impact someone's life publicly, I needed to be certain, absolutely certain. So I started gathering information more intentionally, cross-checking details, watching patterns, keeping track of inconsistencies over time instead of reacting to isolated moments. And slowly, a clearer picture began forming. Not complete, not final, but enough to suggest that something was fundamentally off. The turning point came when I found something that didn't match at all with what had been presented publicly. A detail that contradicted a claim she had repeated multiple times. It wasn't small. It wasn't ambiguous. It was direct. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. That's when everything changed. Because at that moment, doubt turned into something else. Not anger, not yet, but certainty that I needed more than casual observation. I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof. And the more I thought about it, the more one opportunity stood out. A charity gala, a high-profile event, public, structured, documented, a place where people would be gathered, listening, watching, a place where truths, if revealed properly, wouldn't just be heard. They would be witnessed. I didn't know it yet, but that gala wasn't just another event. It was where everything I had been quietly uncovering was about to come together. And once it did, there would be no way to hide it anymore. The room stayed silent for a moment after I walked in. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that feels compressed, like everyone was holding their breath at the same time, waiting for something to explode. My stepmother's face drained of color the second her eyes locked onto mine. "You," she whispered. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, letting the moment stretch, letting it sink in. The same people who had gathered here to celebrate my father's final will, the same people who had been invited to witness what they believed would be the end of the family line, were now staring at a man they had already buried. Behind me, the double doors remained slightly open. A few late arrivals were still trickling in, confused murmurs spreading through the room like a ripple. "Is that him?" I thought he was gone. My stepmother quickly recovered, forcing a strained smile. "This is not the time for jokes," she said sharply, her voice trembling just enough to betray her panic. "Security, please remove this imposter." Two security guards stepped forward, but before they could reach me, I calmly raised my hand. "Wait." The word wasn't loud, but it carried something in my tone made them hesitate. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope, dated, stamped, authenticated. "I think we should let the will be read first," I said evenly. A few people exchanged glances. The lawyer, standing near the front of the room, adjusted his glasses, clearly unsure of how to proceed. My stepmother laughed nervously. "You've already disrupted enough. This is a private family matter." I tilted my head slightly. "Funny," I said, "because this was never meant to be private." That's when I looked at the lawyer. "Please continue." He hesitated. then glanced at my stepmother for approval. She nodded reluctantly, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. Fine, she said. Let's finish this circus. The lawyer cleared his throat and opened the official document again. As previously stated, he began, the primary assets of the estate are to be transferred according to the following conditions. He paused. Something had changed in his expression. His eyes flicked to the page again, then back to me. There is an addendum, he said slowly. A murmur ran through the room. My stepmother's posture stiffened. An addendum? She repeated. The lawyer nodded. Yes, a sealed amendment to the will, legally binding, signed and notarized prior to Mr. Alwood's passing. Now the room was fully alert. Even the guards paused. I stepped forward slightly. That amendment, I said, was added 2 weeks ago. My stepmother's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? The lawyer continued reading. In the event that the deceased's death is determined to have been influenced by manipulation, coercion, or unauthorized control of financial and medical decisions, all primary inheritance rights shall be suspended pending investigation. The room shifted. People started whispering. What does that mean? Unauthorized control? My stepmother's face hardened. This is ridiculous, she snapped. My husband was ill. I cared for him. I made decisions in his best interest. The lawyer raised a hand. There's more. He turned the page. And in such an event, a full forensic audit of financial activity, medical records, and communication logs is to be initiated, with temporary asset control transferred to the designated independent trustee. The room went quiet again. My stepmother's confidence flickered. Independent trustee? She repeated, her voice tighter now. The lawyer nodded. Yes. He looked up, appointed by Mr. Alwood himself. All eyes slowly shifted back to me. I took a step forward. I'd like to introduce myself properly, I said calmly. A pause. My name is not just his son. Another pause. I am the independent trustee. Gasps spread through the room. Whispers turned into open shock. That's impossible. No one mentioned that. My stepmother's eyes widened. No, that's not he would have told me. But she stopped mid-sentence. Because she knew he wouldn't have told her. Not after what she had done. I reached into my bag and placed a tablet on the table in front of the lawyer. Everything is already backed up, I said. Medical records, bank activity, phone logs, private messages. The lawyer glanced at the screen. His expression changed. You've been monitoring this for some time. 6 months, I replied. The room collectively inhaled. 6 months? That meant this wasn't sudden. This wasn't emotional. This was planned. My stepmother's voice rose. This is an invasion of privacy. You had no right. I cut her off. You transferred over $3.2 million from joint accounts in the last 4 months. Silence. You changed his medication dosage records through a private physician who is no longer licensed. Silence deepened. You attempted to remove him from hospice care documentation early while redirecting assets into offshore accounts under a shell company tied to your brother. Now the room wasn't just quiet. It was stunned. Every head turned toward her. She froze. You're lying, she said, but her voice had lost its edge. I tapped the tablet. A screen mirrored onto the large display at the front of the room. Bank transfers, email trails, medical notes, signed authorizations. All time-stamped, all verified. Gasps again, louder this time. A man in the back stood up. Is this real? The lawyer spoke. If these records are authenticated, they are admissible evidence. My stepmother's breathing became shallow. No, this is fabricated. But even as she said it, her hands trembled. Because she knew. And then came the final blow. I turned to face the room. This meeting was never just about the reading of a will. A pause. It was scheduled as a controlled disclosure. I looked directly at her. Because tonight, all parties involved in financial and medical decision-making are here. Her eyes darted around the room, suddenly realizing what I meant. The guests, the lawyer, the trustees, even the investigative observers seated quietly along the sides. This wasn't a family gathering. It was a coordinated audit reveal, and she had walked straight into it. Security, I said calmly. Please secure the exits. The guards immediately repositioned, not to remove me, but to ensure no one left prematurely. My stepmother's voice cracked. You planned this? I nodded. Every step. The room shifted from confusion to realization, to something far sharper. Anticipation. Because now they understood. This wasn't just a dispute over inheritance. This was a collapse in real time. The lawyer closed the folder slowly. I will need to report this immediately, he said. Already done, I replied. My stepmother turned pale. What have you done? I took one final step forward. And for the first time since I entered the room, I smiled. Exactly what my father asked me to do. A beat to make sure the truth came out in front of everyone. And just like that, the room was no longer a memorial. It had become the beginning of an investigation. And she was standing in the center of it, exposed. The moment those words left my mouth, the atmosphere in the room shifted again, but this time, it wasn't shock. It was consequence. My stepmother stood frozen in place, her earlier composure completely gone. The mask she had worn so carefully for months, maybe years, had finally cracked beyond repair. "You're lying," she said again, but this time her voice lacked conviction. "This is some kind of setup. You think you can just walk in here and—" "Sit down," I interrupted calmly. The tone wasn't aggressive. It wasn't loud, but it carried authority. Not the kind you demand, the kind you've already earned. She hesitated. For a brief second, her instinct was to resist, to push back, to reclaim control of the room. But then she looked around and realized she didn't have control anymore. Not of the room, not of the people, not of the situation. Slowly, reluctantly, she sat down. A ripple went through the attendees. Some leaned forward, others exchanged quiet glances. The energy in the room had changed from passive observation to active witness. They weren't just watching a family conflict anymore. They were watching accountability unfold in real time. I turned toward the lawyer. "Proceed with the verification process." He nodded, still processing everything, but visibly shifting into professional mode. "I will initiate immediate authentication of the financial records and notify the legal oversight board," he said. A woman seated near the side, one of the independent auditors, stood up. "I'd like to begin reviewing the bank activity logs now," she added. Another man followed. "And I will cross-reference the medical documentation with licensed providers." One by one, the structure that had been dormant until now came alive. This wasn't chaos. It was controlled exposure. My stepmother's voice broke through again. "This is harassment," she said, her tone rising. "You're all acting on accusations without proof of intent." I looked at her. Intent is irrelevant when the documentation is already signed, time-stamped, and verified. Her eyes flashed. "You think you're smarter than everyone in this room?" I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I reached into my jacket again. And this time, I pulled out a small recording device. The room went quiet again. "What is that?" someone asked. I pressed a button. A voice played through the speakers. Clear, unmistakable. My stepmother's voice. "I don't care what it takes. As long as he's declared incapacitated, we move everything." A pause in the recording. Then another voice, her brother's. "And if anyone questions it?" A short laugh. "They won't. By the time they do, it'll already be done." Gasps filled the room again. My stepmother shot up from her seat. "Turn that off." But I didn't. I let it continue. Another segment played. Dates, amounts, plans, conversations about timing, medication adjustments, discussions about transferring funds before official transitions. Each sentence landing heavier than the last. People in the room were no longer just listening. They were reacting, some in disbelief, others in anger, a few in quiet moral judgment. The recording ended. Silence returned, but it was different now. Heavier. Final. My stepmother sank back into her chair, her hands covering her face. "No," she whispered. For the first time since I entered the room, she didn't argue. She didn't deflect. She didn't fight, because the evidence had already done the work for her. The lawyer spoke again, his tone now firm. "Given the nature of these recordings and the corroborating financial discrepancies, I will be initiating formal escalation to legal authorities." He paused. "And suspending all asset transfers pending investigation." That was the moment it became irreversible. Not dramatic, not loud, just official. My stepmother lowered her hands slowly. Her expression had changed. The panic was still there, but underneath it, something else had begun to surface. Realization. "You set all of this up," she said quietly. I nodded. "I gave you every opportunity to stop." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, "this wasn't the first warning." A few people in the room shifted again, curious. I continued. 3 months ago, a formal inquiry letter was sent regarding irregularities in financial withdrawals. Her face tightened. "You ignored it." 2 months ago, a medical review request was submitted. You redirected it. Last month, a compliance audit was initiated. You attempted to delay it. I stepped closer, and each time, you escalated your own exposure. The room absorbed that this wasn't sudden. It had been building, layer by layer, decision by decision, action by action. My stepmother's voice dropped. "So this entire night was just to trap me?" I shook my head slightly. "No." Pause. "This night was to reveal what was already happening." Another pause. "And to make sure no one could rewrite it afterward." That distinction mattered. And the room understood it. A man in the audience raised his hand hesitantly. "Are there other people involved?" I nodded once. "Yes. That single word sent another wave of tension through the room. My stepmother looked up sharply. You're dragging others into this now? I met Herr Gauze. They dragged themselves in when they chose to participate. The auditors began exchanging notes quietly. The lawyer was already typing into his system, documenting everything in real time. Security remained stationed at the exits, not restricting movement, but ensuring order. At this point, the situation had moved beyond family conflict. It had entered formal proceedings. My stepmother leaned back in her chair, her expression now distant. Not defensive, not aggressive, just drained. You've been planning this for months, she said softly. Yes. And you waited until now? Yes. Why? I didn't answer immediately, because the answer wasn't simple. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about exposure. It was about timing. Finally, I spoke. Because my father asked for truth, not chaos. Pals. He wanted this handled in a way that couldn't be undone. Her eyes flickered slightly at that. At the mention of him, for a brief moment, something human appeared beneath everything else. Regret, or maybe recognition. But it didn't last long, because reality was still closing in. The lawyer closed his laptop. I've completed the initial filing, he announced. This matter is now officially under legal investigation. He looked toward my stepmother. You will be contacted by authorities for a formal statement. The words weren't harsh. They didn't need to be. They were final. Around the room, people began to stand, not in chaos, but in quiet transition. Conversations formed in low voices. Some were still processing, others were already discussing next steps. The atmosphere had completely shifted from anticipation to aftermath. My stepmother remained seated, still, silent. For the first time since this began, she wasn't trying to control the outcome, because the outcome was no longer in her hands. I stepped back slightly, giving space as the room continued to move forward without her. Without resistance, without denial, just process. And as I looked around the room one last time, I realized something. This wasn't the end of a family story. It was the moment the truth finally became impossible to hide, and everything that had been built on deception was no longer standing.